So his great-grandfather and his two other brothers came to Australia from Tuckheim, Germany. So one of the brothers, Johann Friedrich Karl Thiele and Johann Friedrich Wilhelm Thiele, came to Australia on one boat. And Johann Friedrich August Ferdinand and his parents, Johann Christian Ferdinand Thiele and Harriet Thiele, came on a second boat. Johann August Ferdinand had a son, and he named him Karl Wilhelm. He then had a son called Colin Thiele. Johann Friedrich Wilhelm had some kids of his own, and he had a son called Johann August Ferdinand Thiele. He then had a daughter called Elvira Clara, who is my great-grandmother. So that making Colin Thiele my second cousin 3 times removed. It's really a great honour to have such an incredible writer in my family, but if I do want to become a writer, I have some pretty big shoes to fill. Yeah.
Thanks, Kelsey. And now I'd like to invite Kelvin, past chair of the Planning Committee for Secondary Schools Campus.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see a number of old faces that I recognise. They haven't got any older, so obviously this campus was really good to them, and some new people that I haven't met. And just to complete the Thiele message, my grandmother was a Thiele, and my father was Colin's second cousin. So I don't know what that means to me. Third time removed. I just wish I had his ability to write, which I don't, unfortunately. So yes, my name's Kelvin, and I had the pleasure of being involved in this campus from its inception as an idea in mid-1984 through to the establishment of the Golden Grove Educational Services Planning Committee, which I'll just give you a bit of background to, which I took over as chair in January '86. So, we could tell a few stories, some of which would be inappropriate for this function, but I will try and give you a little bit of background because I think the background is important. So the Golden Grove development, where we reside now, commenced in December 1984 as a joint venture between the South Australian Government and Delphin Property Group. The area we now occupy was actually a mixture of farmland and vineyards. Vineyards just to the west of us, and farmland where we sit now, part of the Thiele original property. And the vineyards to the west of us, believe it or not, for those who are wine aficionados, Grange Hermitage until 1966 had Golden Grove fruit in it. So the first, 12 years of Grange had Golden Grove Shiraz from about where the Sunnybrook Primary School campus now resides. So just a bit of useless trivia. Trivia night went up. So the Act, there was an Act of Parliament which bound the Golden Grove development, if you like. And the Act had 9 paramount objectives, 3 of which are relevant to schools planning. The first of those was the economic staging of public works and services, in other words, spending money as required to deliver the services required for the community. The development of facilities as needed by the growing population in accordance with the community development program, recognising this is the mid-80s, early 80s, there were no such thing as community development programs then. This is all new for government. And finally, the development of fully integrated community catering for a comprehensive mix of people. Now, some of you won't realise one of the most controversial matters, and in fact it led to a commission of inquiry, government commission of inquiry to do with Golden Grove, was the fact that it had to have 25% public housing in it. And that was extremely controversial at the time. The City of Tea Tree Gully threatened to do everything except take the government to court to stop that, but in the end the Golden Grove went ahead with the public housing in place. In early 1984, Delphin contacted the Education Department to ensure that schools were incorporated into the broad planning of Golden Grove. You might say, well, why did they do that? The only reason, and David and I were reflecting on this before, is the fact that Delphin's boss was a fellow called Brian Martin, not Brian Martin the lawyer, but another Brian Martin, and he was chair of the Catholic Schools Commission at the time. So as well as being a property developer, he was interested in education, and he felt we could do education planning better. I'm pleased to say the Education Department responded proactively, and in May 1984, the Golden Grove Educational Services Planning Committee was established by the Minister of Education to oversee the creation of the educational focus in the northeastern growing suburbs of Adelaide. The committee comprised major education providers of all persuasions, so we had state Catholic, Lutherans, Anglican, help me David, Baptists, Uniting Church, so anybody out of school in the state was invited to participate. Human service agencies, local government and the Golden Grove Joint Venture. And they listed the problems inherent in education nationwide, and as a consequence developed some objectives for planning education services at Golden Grove. In essence, they developed a new dimension in education and community living, which was conceived and based on the early and significant involvement of the non-government sector, and secondly, the integration of education and other community service providers such as health, welfare, childcare, sports, etc., etc. And as I said, I subsequently had the pleasure of chairing that group. Out of this vision for the whole of the Golden Grove development emerged the concept of centrally locating a secondary education campus of 3 individual schools, adjacent to the proposed district community retail shopping centre, the total complex to. It represented the first integrated secondary education campus in Australia and provided a true example of community integration with Australian-wide significance for the development of new urban growth areas. The 3 key breakthroughs at the time were, 1, 3 secondary schools on adjacent sites and sharing significant specialist education facilities, which we're sitting in here at the moment in the middle of. Secondly, direct links between education and community facilities such as the Recreation and Arts Centre up the hill a bit, and significant involvement of urban developers in financing the education and community facilities. So actually the development cash flowed all of the shared facilities, and stage 1 of the school was built by Delphin, not by the state. It's a bit unusual at the time, you have to agree. Still, we managed, didn't we, David? At the time, Greg Crafter, who's still around and was the then Minister for Education, said, "This concept represents the most modern, innovative and exciting community education complex being developed in Australia." So that's his quote. At its completion, Golden Grove had 5 shared education campuses, catering to 30,000 residents of Golden Grove and more in surrounding areas, with catchments obviously being beyond the boundaries of Golden Grove. Golden Grove, with its innovative campuses, was subsequently awarded 2 major awards, which are worth reflecting on. The first one in particular. Golden Grove was voted the world's best new residential development, in 1998, the first Australian project ever to receive that award from the World Real Estate Federation called FIABC. And secondly, it won the best master plan community in Australia in 2003. So, and a significant, if you read the citations for those awards, a significant amount of the contribution towards those awards was the presence of the schooling solution at Golden Grove. It was recognised nationally and internationally. So Golden Grove High and the other school campuses, other schools in this campus were also the subject of keynote papers at 3 global OECD conferences, 89, 95, 98, and 2 international education facilities planning conferences in 97 and 2003. So no other school or campus has been so studied by the OECD, and to be part of the OECD education portfolio, which still operates today and is perhaps not recognised as much in Australia anymore, the OECD, but let me assure you in Europe and through developing countries it is highly recognised as the authority to go to for modern ideas. To get a gig in those conferences is pretty good, and the school and its broader community should be very proud that it achieved that objective. So, in conclusion, I simply want to congratulate the school on achieving this superb milestone. It doesn't seem that long ago, David, that we were at the hundreds of meetings we had to create this campus and discuss shared arrangements between the schools, but I do congratulate the school on this really, really important milestone and its success to date, and you have been successful. I don't care what anybody else says. The community, the broader community out there, and your past students, I'm sure, would say this campus has been really, really successful, and I'm sure you will continue to be successful in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kelvin. Now I'd like to invite David George, the inaugural principal of Golden Grove High School.
Thank you, and Paul and Kelvin and distinguished guests and friends. I was sitting in a regional office at Elizabeth, and I heard the regional director talk about this new concept of a school, and it was new because it did, so the regional director could say, a number of things. It started a school before the community gets there. Usually communities develop houses, then somebody decides to put up a school. This started and then the houses came. And just to tell you about that, my office was there. And I could look out my window and not see a house. All I could see was machines doing stuff. And that was in 1989. So the school was going to be a centrepiece of the regional development. It was also going to be a place where the high-cost facilities, the costs were shared across several education systems and would be able to be better than perhaps if we'd been building a traditional school. And there was going to be sharing, which means there was the possibility of cross-pollination between the schools and the enlargement of the curriculum, because if we taught language X, some other school might teach language Y. And so I sat there and I thought, that sounds an interesting school. And I went to the regional director and I said, I wouldn't mind being principal of that school. 3 weeks later, the Director General sent me a letter saying congratulations. On the 30th of June 1988, and I remember the day well, some bod walked up to me and handed me a white envelope. I opened the envelope and I'll bet you can't guess what was in it. A cheque for $500,000.
Wow.
Why did I have the cheque? Because any money that wasn't spent by the Education Department in that financial year went back into consolidated revenue. And this was the foundation grant for Golden Grove High School. So at that stage, there was no name to the school. There was a principal and there was $500,000 and the principal had no idea what to do with the $500,000. For the next 2 terms, Golden Grove High School, as it became known, was actually not on this campus. It was at Wynvale Primary School in 2 rooms that they had there. Probably they didn't want to give them up, but they did, and we did the development work that needed to be done, the recruitment of staff, and there'd be people here today who could remember going there and doing stuff and having meetings, and we started to set up the basis of this school. The school was going to be built to house about 1,400 students, which wasn't a bad estimate, I don't think, given that it's now 30 years. And it would, when it grew with the community, it meant that instead of getting a school in a community development 25 years after the community had started the development and had been ageing, this school actually aged with the And so you got more use out of the buildings. That's basically one of the key elements of what happened. It was a school that rejoiced with the other two schools. Probably we had more integration with the Catholic system than we did with Pedare. But here we were, day one, 1989. Golden Grove High School, and I love this, year 1989, it had years 8 and 9, and it had 89 students. Lovely symmetry about that. Where were the students? There were 2 classrooms down there, and there was a classroom over with Ron Allen in the tech area. Was there any other classroom? I think that was it. Principal's office there, and in the corner up there was the Catholic Gleason School. 38 students in the corner of this. About 2 months into the year, and I like this story, the Catholic system had a combined athletics competition involving a number of other Catholic schools, 600 or 700 at this school, 500 somewhere else, 800 somewhere else, and the 38 Gleason students were going to take on these schools. What did they do? They did the absolutely obvious thing. They came over to me and said, David, would you mind if we made you honorary Catholics for a day? So that's some of the Butte things that happened and the thinking that went on. And it's interesting to note, it's easy to say that you share a school and you share the high cost facilities, and then you say, okay, here's a science laboratory. And when you talk about sharing, you talk about the time, you talk about what's in it, and you talk about who pays. And can you imagine the possible fights that you could have as to Pedare wanted their year 11 class or 9 class or whatever it was in this room at this time because that's their timetable. Gleason said, you can't possibly have that, we want it, that's our timetable. And then, so you resolve that. Then, who used how much of the copper sulphate and who used how much of this and how much time do you debit the laboratory assistant? I don't know whether they've still worked out. Have you worked out how that's paid yet? Yes. Anyhow, that was great. It was good fun. And as Kelvin has said, endless meetings. My September holidays in 1989, school holidays, I attended 30 meetings. That's just the way it was. But we rejoiced, and we rejoiced with a staff that loved being here, that had a real sense of creativity. I remember Rex making a race round the, whatever you call it, courtyard, and all sorts of things that we did. Delphin, and I have to pay tribute to Delphin, I was telling Kelvin this, the education department in those days wouldn't be like this now. Whenever you came up with an idea, they asked 2 questions. How much will it cost? Has it ever been done before? And if it costs too much, and if it had never been done before, scratch. Don't want to know about it. You go to Delphin, you'd come up with an idea, they would say, is it a good idea? Let's think about it. And if it's a good idea, there must be a way to make it happen. And that really opened my eyes to how you think about life, really. If it's a good idea, there must be a way to make it happen. What we wanted from the school, right from the inception, and I pay tribute to the staff of the day, and from what I've had a continuing relationship with the school, and I see this happening and I congratulate them, that we wanted students to feel safe, we wanted them to enjoy their schooling, and we wanted them to excel at their schooling. And we set out in a number of ways to make that possible, so that coming to Golden Grove was an experience that would set them up for life and set them up in a creative way for life. And I've talked to a few of you today, and you've made the most of what you got out of schooling. I congratulate you. And I thank the teachers who were here then that worked with me in such a positive and creative way. So it's been a blessing to see the school thrive, to note its continual growth, not so much in size because it's about as big as it needs to get, I think, but no, you get to primary school.
No, I'll tell you all about it.
But its growth in terms of the way that it treats children, it inculcates in them values that we all value. And one last story about how the school got to be what it is today. I was over at Marriotteville, I forget what they called it now, a school for students with significant learning and physical disabilities. And there was a centre there with I don't know how many students, and I said to them, do any of these students come from out north?